Hey, what's going on guys? It's Aston Edmonds with Health and Wellness, and today we're going to be talking about how to most optimally train the hamstring muscle for maximum hypertrophy. Now, I'm not necessarily going to be talking about how to train them for athletic performance or overall strength, but more for overall muscular development. And so in order to do this, we need to know and understand the hamstring muscles. We need to know what functions they perform and a little bit about the anatomy. So the hamstring is made up of 3 separate muscles, one of which has 2 separate heads. So the best way to think about it is the hamstring has 4 separate heads. Now, the main functions of the hamstrings are hip extension and knee flexion. 3 of the 4 heads perform both functions, while the 4th only performs knee flexion. So when somebody tells you the only thing you need to do for hamstrings is deadlifts, that's not the case because one of the 4 heads is just not being worked. The hamstrings are what is known as a biarticular muscle, which means that it performs 2 different functions on 2 different joints. And the thing with biarticular muscles is they have something called the active inefficiency, which means if you're trying to perform both functions, hip extension and knee flexion, at the same time, you cannot perform both functions maximally. You cannot produce maximum force. The best way to think about this is just ourselves and multitasking. If you're trying to do 2 separate tasks at the same time, you cannot do both of them optimally. You can perform the task much better just by focusing on one at a time. And that's the same way with the muscles. We cannot produce maximum force on 2 separate joints at the same time. So what we want to do is find exercises that isolate the functions of the hamstring. So we want to find an exercise that we only perform hip extension and one that we only perform knee flexion and not both functions together. And so the most famous hip extension exercise is going to be the deadlift. Now, I feel the deadlift is a great overall exercise. It's a great full body developer, but when it comes to isolating hip extension, it won't quite produce the same tension on the hamstring muscle as, say, a stiff leg deadlift. Because with the conventional deadlift, there is a slight degree of knee flexion going on. When the stiff leg deadlift, you're taking the knee flexion out and only focusing on hip extension. So in my opinion, the stiff-legged deadlift is going to put more tension just on the hamstring as opposed to the body overall. So this doesn't mean you should replace conventional deadlifts with stiff-legged deadlifts. It just means maybe there's something that you should throw in addition to them. So now we need to look at exercises that perform the knee flexion function. So these exercises are going to be stuff like the seated hamstring curl, the glute ham raise, the lying hamstring curl. Some places even have a standing hamstring curl. But the thing that the glute ham raise, lying hamstring curl, and standing hamstring curl have in common is you are in hip extension as you're trying to perform knee flexion. And this is not what we want. We want to be in hip flexion, the opposite of hip extension, while we're trying to perform knee flexion. So the best exercise for this is going to be the seated hamstring curl, because you're taking hip extension out of the equation and you're able to focus solely on knee flexion. So one tip while performing the seated hamstring curl is to actively flex your hip flexors. This is going to not only give you a better stretch at the top of the movement, but also take any hip extension out of the equation. Alright, so let's do a quick recap. In order to most effectively train the hamstring muscle, we need to isolate the functions into separate exercises: hip extension and knee flexion. So the best exercise for each function is going to be the stiff leg deadlift for hip extension and the seated hamstring curl for knee flexion. That's the end of the video. I hope you guys found this informative. If you did, please give it a thumbs up rating. That really helps the channel grow. If you haven't already, go ahead and click that subscribe button. You'll be notified when I upload future videos. But until next time, thanks for watching and have a great day.